And welcome to this edition of the Native News Update on this Thursday, September 1st. I'm your host for today's program, Paul DeMain, and we go straight to Window Rock, Arizona for a report from correspondent Marley Shebala of the Navajo Times. Marley Shebala, welcome to the Native News Update from Window Rock, Arizona. Tell us a little bit about some of the things that are going on out of Window Rock for the Navajo Nation today.
Well, for the past few weeks, well, actually since August 5th, the news has been the Navajo Nation settlement with Peabody Coal, Southern California Edison, and Salt River Project over a racketeering lawsuit that the tribe filed against them back in 1999. And they were seeking over $600 million in damages. And there was even talk of it going up as high as $1.8 billion because it involved coal royalties from the Black Mesa mines. And back then there were two mines that Peabody was strip mining. They have one that's continuing, but back then it was two of them. And the basis of the lawsuit was that back in the early 1970s, the federal government had passed legislation that, and it was in law, and then the Interior Department followed up and also approved it, was for coal leases to be receiving at 12.5% coal royalties. Meanwhile, the Navajo Nation Peabody was paying the Navajo Nation 37, maybe about 38 cents per ton of coal. And this coal has been graded as very high quality coal, and then it's coal strippable. So the Secretary of the Interior back then, Hodel, without the knowledge of the tribe, started talking with Peabody, what they call ex parte communication.
Right.
And this wasn't discovered until the tribe went through a discovery phase, and all these memos started coming through. And at that time, it was filed during President Begay's administration. But all of that had started under President Zaw. And for some reason, unlike what happened in 1999, where the tribe held press conferences, issued copies of the lawsuit. I mean, they involved everyone knew they were filing this lawsuit because it was huge.
Right.
And then when they settled, though, there was no announcement. And I did a story about that. Why is the tribe being so quiet about this announcement? And Peabody Coal.
What was the answer to your question?
I never got an answer. A week later, there was a press release from the council saying the settlement had been reached.
Okay.
And what is interesting is that the settlement maintains a 12.5% royalty rate, which is, the tribe had said back then in 1979, it should be at 12.5. Right. And then when that lease was ready to be renegotiated 20 years, which was 1984, they found that based on all this research, which was done by the federal government, that the tribe should actually receive 20% coal royalty rate. And of course, that didn't happen, and it hasn't happened.
Right. Do you know what kind of a monetary settlement was involved in that negotiations?
There was a $50 million settlement, and there was also additional funds. And I found a press release actually from a law firm that's representing the tribe. And so I'm going to be doing a follow-up story. So far, I've done 3 stories on it. And the most recent was this week's, and it involved former Chairman Peterson Zaw and also then Bureau of Indian Affairs Navajo Area Director Donald Dodge, who was supporting the 20% and actually sent the letter to Peabody saying the tribe deserves a 20% coal royalty rate. And those two got together after they read my stories and said, you know what, when we started this, we wanted to put that money in a scholarship trust fund. And they said that every Navajo child has a right to an education.
Mm-hmm. So do you find that...
income.
Okay, say that again, the last part.
I said, right now, the tribal scholarships are based on income. There are some scholarships that are based on academic achievement, but most of them are based on income. And there's just not enough scholarship money. I mean, it's dwindled significantly. So they're turning away literally thousands of eligible Navajo students that have high academic standing.
Okay. You had a visit from Albert Hale last week. Was that part of the visit having to do with this settlement or other issues?
Well, actually, no, it was actually Chairman Peterson Zaw that came to the
Oh,
office
okay, okay.
with Donald Dodge with this idea. And so they're starting this campaign and they're meeting with universities locally, meeting Arizona State University, University of Arizona, Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, the University of New Mexico. And they're going to have a press conference during the tribal fair next week on Wednesday to pass resolutions supporting that the council put this money into a scholarship trust fund. And it was actually under Chairman Zaw, who also received a windfall of monies by, he went into court against Kerr McGee and said, you know, we have a right to tax corporations on our land that are taking these natural resources. And of course, the corporations fought it. But the Supreme Court said, yes, every government has a right to tax. And that was a huge win. And that occurred during the negotiations with Peabody. And so Peabody, you know, was doing all this backdoor dealing. And they even admitted it in their federal documents that they filed with the federal court.
Okay.
And they talked about the vision. And I think, you know, all tribes have, that's one thing that we always had was vision. You know, otherwise we wouldn't all be here. We wouldn't have our land still if it wasn't for our, you know, our leadership back then. They had vision. Right now, a lot of tribes are having a really hard time because, you know, it's sad to say, but our leadership doesn't have that vision. They kind of live day to day, or they have a 5-year plan instead of, you know, a 20, 50-year plan.
Or a 7 generations plan.
That's what I mean. Exactly. Exactly.
And I can see how if there was a $22 million budget deficit and there happens to be a one-time chunk of money that comes in there, they really haven't done anything but stave off the next time around when they're going to come up short again, perhaps.
Yeah, within their announcement, there was no discussion. If they had said, listen, you know, we erased the deficit and this is how it was created, and we are going to really, you know, be financially accountable. But that wasn't even part of the announcement. That was disappointing.
Okay. We ran an article on the Native News Update maybe a week ago, having, and this is a segue a long ways, discussing a problem with dogs on the reservation. And I just wondered if you had any follow-up to that article. It was an AP article that proposed that there was a couple 100,000 dogs running wild on the reservation collectively. Are those numbers realistic, and is the problem as serious as what some of these reports have said?
Well, you know that and I did a series of stories about dogs on the reservation, and that the numbers are correct. But they used one instance where a dog attacked, this group of dogs attacked this man. And they're not even sure if the man had, according to our reports, the man actually had some kind of a heart attack or something. And, you know, there was nobody around, which is true on the reservation because we live far apart from each other. Right. And he was walking, and then these dogs came up and attacked, and that was sad. And but there have been dog attacks. You know, children have been bitten. There was instances where up in Kayenta, there was an individual attacked, but most of these have been attacks on livestock. And out here, to buy a sheep, it costs between 110 to maybe about 120, so you know, these dogs. I've covered stories where dogs have destroyed a whole flock of sheep, and not even killed or eaten them. They just kind of go rampaging through. And there's some of these positions, and for some reason they pulled back on some of these positions. I did an interview with a dog control officer, and he said, you know, there was at one point they used to have like 50 officers, and now they have one in each agency. There are 5 agencies.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's a huge problem. But I was looking at President Shelley's budget request for 2012, and he wants to restore positions for animal control back into that.
Yeah. Looks like it takes a combination of not only individuals dealing with the excess pets and populations, like you say, funding patrol officers, but something has to be done because it doesn't seem like wild dogs should be the number one issue that Native communities have to deal with. But there are several reservations where enough dogs run wild that it concerns people and concerns parents about young children and so forth. The dogs, at least as pets,
Oh, yeah.
being defensive, and the ones that run wild are just wild.
Well, what happens too is that these wild dogs, as they're running in a pack, if you have a dog in your that's a pet, and they go running by, it's like a mob mentality. They'll just jump right in with the bunch, and they'll become part of that pack of dogs, and
Yeah,
you'll lose your pet. And people don't realize it's just not wild dogs. That is, if they go through a community, other dogs will run right along with them, and they get larger and larger. And one of the areas too that people have been trying to do is prevention, education.
right,
Take care of your pets.
right. Is there a whole lot of packs of Navajos headed to the Navajo Nation Fair? This coming up weekend, and tell us a little bit about what's going on with that.
Oh yeah, oh absolutely. I did a really wonderful interview with the current Miss Navajo. Her name is Winifred Jumbo, and talked to her about as she's been out there during her year and visiting chapters, schools across the reservations. I said, what is it that people talk about when they talk about the pageant, and they want to know more information about it? And she says the most popular pageant event or competition is the sheep butchering contest. And for a while they weren't having it. You
But
know,
it would be similar for tribes in the Great Lakes area. If they have a princess, she'd have to know how to quarter a deer, or maybe out in Dakota countries, they need to know how to take care of a buffalo as part of the requirements. Tell us a
well
little bit
that's
what
it.
goes into that.
And out here they actually butcher them. They bring in, the sheep. Last year, there were 9 contestants. She was one of the contestants, and they divided them up into 3 teams. And she was saying that she hopes that this year that the sheep are not that fat. She says because when the sheep are fat, it gets the knife really greasy, and it kept slipping in her hands. And it was a timed event. And so she had to keep switching out her knives, so that she could, properly hold her knife. And she said, and it's really hot in the place. I mean, and the place was just crowded. And so, and the tribal fair begins next week on the 4th. And there's just going to be all kind of events. They're going to have the rodeo, the powwow, the Navajo song and dance, the Miss Navajo competition. They're actually going to unveil a new Miss Navajo crown. And I've started doing some research on it. And when the first Miss Navajos, when it was first created, they weren't wearing crowns.
Right.
And somewhere it was like in the 50s, and I think it was like maybe in the 70s or around there, they started wearing their crowns. And back then, the young women actually made their own crowns.
Oh,
and then
interesting.
eventually the tribe made the crowns.
Okay.
And so, and at one point we did a story about a crown that was found in a pawn shop, a Miss Navajo crown.
Wow.
Yeah, people got all, outraged over it, but it belonged to the former Miss Navajo, so she could do whatever she wanted with it.
Someday in the Navajo Museum, you're going to have a whole display of Navajo crowns and the butcher knife that went along with the winner.
I think they should. I really think that they should. And I think that they should also, allow people to go in. You can go in, and wear the crown and get your picture taken with it,
Sounds good. If I was close by, I'd run right down there. Marley, we're out of time for today. Thanks for joining with us from Window Rock. What's the URL for the Navajo Times again?
NavajoTimes.com.
We'll catch up with you soon again. Miigwech.
All right. Okay. I'm going at.
And that is the latest roundup of news from Indian Country on this edition of the Native News Update. Thank you for joining with us, and come back again tomorrow for your favorite Kimberly Acosta.